probably remember, okay? Let me ask you, just to check, okay? What is immediate constituent analysis in morphology, perhaps? Do you remember what is IC, immediate constituent analysis? We'll need it in syntax as well. So what is IC analysis? What do we do with it in morphology?
That is a process when we divide words into morphemes.
Yes, exactly. So this is the definition. This is what I expect from you as the exam. Okay. So division of words into morphemes. You have several rules which we are not going to repeat now. Okay. And what about the topic? You remember suffixes, homophones. Perhaps you can explain. Let's say, what did we say about ly? Why this could be called a suffix as a homophone? Perhaps this example, daily, quickly, friendly. What did we say last time? Or what is a suffix homophone?
When the same suffix can have different functions, grammatical functions.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so in this case, you have ly for deriving adverbs or deriving adjectives. Okay, but we can even have the case when the same suffix, for example, er can be inflectional, derivational. Yes, this is exactly what you said. Okay, I think this is where we stopped. Okay, so this is all about morphology. You remember morphology, studying words, structure of words. We stopped at the level of words. Okay, now we have to go to syntax. You remember also that we have several levels of analysis. The first level was phonetics, phonology, studying sounds and phonemes. Then we have morphology words. Then we have larger units in syntax. In syntax, we obviously start from words, but we are not interested in the structure of words. We start from words and how words are combined. Okay, let me just check. Yes, somebody else, okay. We start from words, but how words are combined into larger units. And these larger units are phrases, clauses, and sentences. So we do have words, but we are not interested in their structure, in the morphemes, okay? So we have to think about phrases, clauses, and sentences in syntax. The very name, yes, you have a question or? No, okay. Let me just check. Yes, everything seems to be fine, okay? So we have the very term syntax comes from Greek syntaxis, which actually means something like linking or arranging, okay? So syntax, linking, arranging words into larger units, words and phrases into larger units like clauses and sentences. I already mentioned it. So the largest unit is a sentence. However, in language, there are larger units. There are discourse and text, but they are studied in discourse analysis and text linguistics. So that's why we say that the largest unit in syntax is a sentence. So the question for you is, I mentioned larger units, discourse and text. What is the difference between discourse and text, for example? What is the difference between the term discourse and text?
Maybe the discourse is language which is spoken, or the style of the language itself.
Yes.
While the text is something which is written on a piece of paper.
Yes, exactly. So just bear this in mind. Exactly. Okay. So text, it means written communication, something written, as you said, on the piece of paper. And discourse is oral communication, so like dialogues and so on. Yes. Okay. So that's why we have discourse and text studied in discourse analysis and text linguistics. Okay. So sentence is the largest unit in syntax, but there are larger units not studied within syntax. So we have units larger than the word, and now we need some tests perhaps to establish them, okay? Why tests? Well, when you study morphology, it's relatively easy to establish a word. You know that a word is something usually, not always, but usually written between spaces. But if you want to establish larger units than a word, maybe you then may have a problem, okay? You need some criteria or tests to know that something is a phrase, okay? So that's why we have here tests to establish units. For example, maybe I could ask you before we go through all these tests, how do you know that 2 or 3 or more words make a phrase? How do you know that they are phrases, that they make a phrase, not just words, but also they make a phrase? How do you know that they make a phrase?
Well, maybe because, oh, sorry, somebody else wanted to say.
It's okay. If you want to answer, it's okay. Yes.
Well, maybe we know that something is a phrase because it has certain meaning, which is coherent and understandable.
Yes, meaning together. This is a good point. Yes, okay, meaning together. And you'll see later, words should be, we say it grammatically related, which actually means what? You have one word, which we're going to call head word. You probably use the term in grammar course, okay? And we have modifiers, okay? We'll come to that, okay? So this is how you know that this is a phrase, a unit. It should have the meaning and should have a specific structure, okay? So we'll come to that a bit later, okay? So think about it. It's relatively easy to establish a word, but if we have phrases, we have to think about it, which words make a phrase, okay? So you probably mentioned these tests in the grammar course, probably. The tests like movement, substitution, and insertion, okay? So let's check 1A and B. Okay, the 1A and B illustrate movement, the test called movement. Obviously, the sentence, those students have made an interesting discovery, is an active sentence. You simply passivized it in B. An interesting discovery has been made by those students. What did we move and what did we prove by moving, by this movement? Or let me put it this way, what is the rule? What you can move in a clause? Okay, let me answer it, okay? So we obviously moved what? An interesting discovery is an object. We moved it to the initial position, okay, here, okay? So to passivize, okay, let me just check this, okay? Admit, okay. Yes, sorry, okay. So this is where I stopped, okay? So we moved an interesting discovery to the initial position, okay? Now let me ask you, this is an object, direct object, you know that. It is, the rule for movement is you can move the entire unit, entire phrase. You cannot move half of the phrase. For example, you cannot say those students can make an interesting and move discovery at the beginning. Discovery has been made by those students uninteresting. You cannot make such a sentence. So the rule for movement is you can move the entire phrases, the entire units, not just parts of phrases. And this is how we prove that this is a phrase. So the conclusion is, if you can move several words together to a different position, it proves that these words make a phrase. So an interesting discovery is a phrase because it can be moved together, okay? You cannot leave part of a phrase, okay? So the rule for movement is, yes, you can move entire constituents, entire units. This is the first test, okay? The second test is substitution. 2A and B, that car of yours is giving me a lot of trouble. And B, it is giving me a lot of trouble. So perhaps you can see, obviously, that car of yours is a phrase, it's a subject. And what did we do in B? We simply used a pronoun instead of a noun phrase, okay? So what is the rule for substitution then? And what do we prove by using pronouns as substitutions?
Maybe that if we have like a group of words that can be
Hey.
substituted with one pronoun, then it's a phrase.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. So this is the rule for substitution. You can use a pronoun as a substitution for the entire phrase. okay? And it proves that this is a phrase. You cannot use a substitution for part of a phrase. For example, you cannot say "it of yours is giving me a lot of trouble." Does not make sense, okay? So yes, as you said, the rule is if you use a pronoun as a substitution, it can be used only instead of an entire phrase. So this is how we can prove that this is a phrase, a unit or a constituent, okay? So this is substitution, usually with pronouns. And finally, insertion with 3A and B. He went there to see the results. B, he went there in order to see the results. We inserted in order to, okay? Remember, this is called insertion, okay? We inserted in order to, okay? So let me explain this one. Maybe we can ask a question there to see the results. Is it one syntactic unit or perhaps two syntactic units? What did we do by inserting in order to? Well, where can you insert new linguistic material? Only between units. This is important. So this is the rule for insertion. You can insert linking elements between units, okay? So by inserting in order to, we proved that there is one unit, and to see the result is the second unit. So there to see the results, they do not make one, but two units, okay? So to conclude, the rule for substitution is you can insert linking elements in between the units, okay? But we have to be careful. I'm not thinking about inserting, for example, not inserting, for example, adjectives in front of a noun. Just think about it, okay? So this insertion does not mean inserting a new adjective. You have, for example, the noun phrase, the computer, and then you insert the new computer. This is not the type of insertion we are interested in. We are interested in inserting linking elements, like in order to, and, but, and so on, okay? So linking elements, not new adjectives or similar words, okay? So we need tests to establish syntactic units, okay? I believe this should be clear now. So we can, if you have any question, you can ask, okay? So now we can go to the syntactic units like phrases, clauses, and sentences. Okay, now this is important. This definition of a phrase, you should really learn it, because this is the basic thing. This is important, okay? So how do you know that something is a phrase? Well, it's a group of two or more grammatically related words. You remember we said, a student said they should have the specific meaning, yes. And this is the most important part. They do not include the relation of predication, okay? So what is the difference between a phrase and a clause, for example, phrase and clause?
Maybe clause has a relation of predication.
Exactly. So, yes. Anybody else? No. Okay. No. This is important. Just bear this in mind. Phrases do not have predication. Clauses have predication. This is important. This is very basic. Okay. By predication, I mean the relation between the subject and the predicate. Okay. So you know, like verb in a sentence with the subject. So predication means the relation between the subject and the predicate. We do not have it in a clause. Okay. Sorry, we do not have it in a phrase. We do have it in a clause. Sorry. So phrases do not have the relation of predication. This is important. If it is not clear, please ask. Okay. Now we can go to the structure of phrases. You'll see that it is relatively easy. You probably did it in the grammar course, but we'll go through this anyway. Okay. So all the phrases have the following structure: pre-modification, head or head word, and post-modification. How do you know which type of a phrase it is? Well, you have to look at the head word. If it is a noun phrase, the head word is a noun. We have examples later, okay? If it is a verb, if its head word is a verb, then it is a verb phrase. Prepositional phrase with a preposition, adverbial phrase with an adverb, adjective phrase with an adjective. Okay, so type of phrase is determined by the head word, this element in the middle. Okay, so let's see some of these examples. Why the old gray bicycle is a noun phrase? Because bicycle is a head word, and other words simply modify the head word. Is reading is a verb phrase because reading is the head word, and auxiliary only modifies the head word. In the house is a prepositional phrase because in is the head word and followed by a noun phrase. So we have in a preposition followed by a noun phrase. Okay, and finally, very nice is an adjective phrase because nice is an adjective. You added modification in front. Or adverbial phrase, quickly. Quickly is clearly an adverbial with ly. And we added some modification like very quickly. Okay, so this is the structure of words, sorry, of phrases, pre-modification, head word, post-modification. Okay, and the head word determines the type of a phrase. Okay, now let's focus on the noun phrases. Okay, pre-modification, post-modification in noun phrases to illustrate this. So pre-modification of nouns, we have you have a list here. We can have determiners, members, adjectives, nouns, genitive of nouns, and some complex structures. Let's see the examples. Okay, what about all the books? The book, books is the head word. What would you say about all and the? They belong to which word? Which of those listed here? They are in pre-modification because they stand in front, but they belong to which type of those which I mentioned in the previous line?
Determiners.
Determiners, exactly. They are determiners. You probably did it in grammar course already. Yes, okay. So Helen's book is a genitive. Helen's book. An oak table, the oak table. Oak is what I have here as nouns. But what is the function of this oak? It is a noun, but it functions as a pre-modifier, almost like an adjective. If you translate this in Serbian, you can see that it has the function of an adjective. So oak is what I listed here as nouns, but this is a pre-modifier, okay? And finally, for example, an on-the-spot investigation. Investigation, the head word. On the spot. Okay, let me just check this. Okay, no. Okay, yes, we got a message. Okay. An on-the-spot investigation. What kind of a phrase is on the spot, written with hyphens here? Well, yes, it's a prepositional phrase. I believe this is what you said, okay? This is what I have here, some complex structures, okay? If you think about the list I have here, some complex structures, this is what I mean by it. Some prepositional phrases written with hyphens, okay? So just to be clear, if you look at this complex structures, this is what I mean by complex structures. An on-the-spot investigation, on the spot is a prepositional phrase functioning as a pre-modification of a noun, okay? So again, complex structures like these, okay? Now let's check the post-modification of nouns. We have a list here, prepositional phrases, PPs, prepositional phrases, clauses, sometimes adjectives, rarely in English. This is the typical structure, post-modification meaning following the nouns, after the nouns. In French, adjectives follow the nouns, but in English, they do not, they precede. So in some exceptional cases, we have adjectives after the noun, okay? Let's check the examples, okay? The book about grammar. So what is the head word? Maybe I can ask you, what is the head word here?
Book.
Book is the head word, yes. You have a pre-modification, the determiner, and then you have what about grammar, a prepositional phrase which follows, okay? So book, head word, followed by a prepositional phrase in post-modification. Secretary General, the head word, you can hear this in United Nations. So secretary is the head word, general is an adjective, because it's taken from French. The word order taken from French, okay, Secretary General. In English, it will usually be General Secretary, okay, but in United Nations, you use this. So this is an example of adjectives following the noun, okay? And finally, the clause, the girl who is standing there is his sister, okay? Now, again, the question for you, what is the head word here? Girl, okay, the girl is the head word, pre-modification determiner, and who is sitting here is a clause, it's a relative clause, post-modifying the girl. This is the predicate and the part of a clause. Is his sister is the other parts of the clause. We're interested in this one, this part. Girl is the head word. So who is standing there is a clause post-modifying the noun. Think about it. It's usually sometimes is a problem when we ask during the oral exam for the students to produce an example of a noun post-modifying, clause post-modifying the noun, and then the students somehow get confused. Okay, but this is a relative clause. Think about relative clauses. Okay, so we have this structure of phrases like pre-modification, head word, and post-modification. Okay, now let's say something about the clause and sentence. So sentence, traditionally, you know that probably from elementary, secondary school, unit expressing the entire thought. But it's a bit problematic because it's difficult to say what is the entire thought. If you say, for example, computer, full stop, is it the entire thought or not? Okay, so this is the definition given in traditional grammar, but not really used anymore, okay? Or you can even say a string of words between two full stops. You know, you have a full stop, then another sentence, and then a full stop. But it also, you probably remember the examples when you talked about phonemes and morphemes. So you can say, for example, fire, and then make a full stop. So is it a sentence or not? So this is also a problematic definition. So we are going to use something which is more contemporary. So in contemporary syntax, clause is a structure, this is important, with only one predication, one subject and predicate relation. This is a simple sentence, okay? And now I have to be clear, okay? We're discussing clauses and sentences, but simple sentence, as you can see, equals to a clause. Simple sentence is equal to a clause because clause has one predication. Simple sentence has one predication. Okay, so clause equals the simple sentence. Then what is the complex sentence? I have it here. What is a complex sentence? I have it in the next line. Well, it's still a sentence, but consisting of what? Several clauses. That's what we call complex sentence, okay? So simple sentence, only one clause. Complex sentence, at least two clauses or more clauses. We have examples later, okay? So clause, this is what it means. Clause is larger than a phrase, but smaller than a complex sentence. Clause is larger than a phrase. Why? Because it has to have the relation of predication. Clauses have to have the subject and the predicate. Like in English, it's obligatory. So this is what it means, larger than a phrase. It has to have at least two phrases. But if you think about Serbian, you know that it can omit the subject. Radio je, full stop. But the subject is where? The subject is somehow implied in the suffixes radio je, on. Okay? So subject predicate relation is important. It is necessary for a clause. Okay, so complex sentence, at least two clauses or more. So clause has two or more phrases and obligatorily the relation of predication. I say two or more phrases because there has to be at least two, subject and the predicate. Okay, but let me ask you, if it is clear, okay, so far, then we can go to the word order. Okay.
Professor, just a second. When we talk about a complex sentence, then a complex sentence, as you've already mentioned, is just a combination or a mixture of clauses.
Yes,
If
exactly.
I
Yes.
understood you correctly.
Yes, yes, okay, yes. We'll have a couple of examples. Perhaps we can provide an example even now. So you can have a complex sentence with and, for example, it is sunny and everybody is walking. Why this would be a complex sentence? It is sunny and everybody is walking outside, for example. Why is it a complex sentence?
Well, maybe because it is a combination or two clauses are linked together in order to form it.
Yes, yes, exactly. Two clauses or two predications: is sunny, walks, is walking outside, walks outside. So we have, yes, we have two clauses, or it means two predications. Exactly as you said, it's a combination of several, two or more clauses to get a complex sentence. Yes, I think this is what you asked. Yes, it's
Thank
a
you, Professor.
combination. Yes, okay, it's okay.
Thank you.
Okay. You can always stop me and ask if it is something was not completely clear. Okay, so we have a clause. Let's go back to clauses. Our topic is clause and sentence. So to sum up, complex sentence have at least two clauses or more. Simple sentence is equals to a clause. Okay, so within a clause, within a clause, we can discuss, for example, word order, WO, abbreviated. Okay, so this is simply the order of syntactic units in a clause, like subject, predicate, object, adverbials, and so on. It can be free or fixed. I think we already mentioned this one when we discussed Old English, but let me repeat this quickly, okay? So word order in a clause can be free or fixed. Languages with rich inflection usually have the free word order, okay? You have, in brackets, the situation like in Serbian or Latin. Why? Because you have inflections. For example, cases. If it is the nominative case, you know that it is the subject. If it is the accusative case, you know that it is the object. So you can move the subject to a different position. It does not have to be the first. Okay? So this is why it influences word order. If you mark grammatical relations in a clause by inflection, you don't need a fixed word order. The word order can be free. Okay? But languages with less rich inflection usually have a fixed word order, like in English. Okay? So if you check these examples 5 or 4, Serbian and English, and this is very easy, but let's go through this anyway. Okay? So in Serbian, you can obviously say Petar je udario Pavla, or Pavla je udario Petar. What is the subject here? Petar, obviously, even if it is in B, even if it is placed in the final position. You know that it is the subject because it has the nominative case. Pavla is the object, even if it is in the initial position, because you see the case, okay, accusative case, okay. So this is what you can do in the free word order languages. However, in English, 5a and b, it's very clear. You have the sentence Peter hit Paul. You know that the subject and the doer is Peter. Paul is the object, the sufferer. But if you change the word order, Paul hit Peter, the sentence changes. Paul becomes the doer. Peter becomes the sufferer, the object. Okay. So this is why we have the fixed word order. So you know that the first noun phrase is the subject. We are not talking about questions. We are talking about positive sentences, not questions. Okay. So free or fixed word order, we can discuss this within a clause. Okay. The second thing we can discuss within a clause is agreement, or sometimes called concord, between the subject and the predicate. Okay. You know that the predicate agrees with the head word of the subject, but let me add, agreement is seen if you have inflections. Okay. perhaps it's better you can see it better in Serbian than in English, but let's check the English example. In this case, you can see the agreement, okay? Number 6. That car of Tom's is giving him a lot of trouble, okay? The subject is that car of Tom's, okay? So what is the head word giving him, to which the predicate is giving him agrees? That car of Tom's. Well, obviously, car is the head word, okay, with pre-modification and post-modification, okay? And the predicate is agrees with the car, okay? It is easier to illustrate it with Serbian, but we can have an example in English as well, okay? So predicate agrees with the head word. We have several words in this subject that agrees with the head word, okay? And this is all about, we are going to mention about agreement. Now we can proceed with the clauses and different divisions of clauses. This is important, okay? For syntax, think about examples for the oral exam. Sometimes students get confused when they have to produce an example of different types of clauses, okay? So divisions of clauses, we have several divisions. This is just the first one, okay? So we have the very basic division into declarative, interrogative, imperative, and exclamatory clauses. This is a traditional division. Declarative sentences produce information, produce facts, okay? Interrogative, they ask questions with inversion. You know that we have inversion in questions. Imperative, you know that what is their function? They introduce orders or instructions, or perhaps different kinds of statements with which you want to influence somebody's behavior, okay? Imperative, telling somebody what to do, okay? And finally, exclamatory, usually expressing emotion, subject's emotional attitude, usually with exclamatory, okay? So declarative, the most typical type, presenting facts. The second division is into positive and negative. Very simply, positive, simply presenting facts with the predication that something exists, something is true. Negative, having the particle not or negative adverbial like never, and they say that the predication is negative, does not exist, okay? This is quite simple. And C in this group, this first division, is elliptic clauses. You already know this, I believe, from secondary school grammar or elementary school grammar. This means that an element is missing. It is understood from the context, like rain or fire with an exclamation mark, okay? This is elliptic because we have just one noun. We do not have the predicate. The full sentence would be rain is falling or fire is burning and so on, okay? This is elliptic. This is relatively easy, okay? Now let's go back to the sentence again. Sentence is the largest independent unit in syntactic description. It is not a part of a larger construction, but in syntax, it is part of the larger units like text and discourse. We explained it at the beginning today, okay? So it is not a part of a larger construction, but in syntax, perhaps in discourse analysis and text linguistics, okay? It's independent, can stand alone, okay? So sentences, we can talk about their intonation and punctuation. Punctuation, quite simply, you use full stops, commas, you use colons, semicolon, exclamation marks, and so on. And sentences have their intonation. So what is, for example, the intonation, typical intonation in English for if you want to ask a question? What is the intonation, the melody like of the sentence?
Maybe we could.
Yes, please go on, yes. Okay, perhaps you wanted to say it is
I'm sorry, Nikita.
Yes, okay, it's okay. If you want to ask a question, you usually have the rising intonation, okay, not flat, okay. you'll say much more about it in the course about phonetics phonology. Okay, so intonation can be rising, for example, in questions and so on. Okay, we need not go into details here. Okay, now something perhaps more difficult to explain. Okay, so we have sentence as an abstract unit. Its concrete realization is called the utterance, in Serbian iskaz. Okay, let me remind you, you remember phoneme and morpheme. We already mentioned that phoneme is what? Is an abstract unit. If you use it in a sentence, it becomes a phone. Okay, you remember in morphology, if you have a morpheme, it's an abstract unit. If you use it in a structure in a language, it becomes a morph. This is the similar rule. Okay, so we have a sentence, abstract unit, but if it is used in a concrete situation, then it becomes an utterance. Okay, so simply utterance is related to specific time, place, situation with a specific subject, doer, or specific verb. Okay, so sentence is sometimes treated as an abstract unit, utterance as a concrete unit, realization of a sentence. Okay, then we can proceed with the sentences and more division of sentences. Okay, so sentence can consist of one or more clauses. We already mentioned this one. If it is a simple sentence, it has one predication, actually one clause. If it is a complex sentence, it has more than one predication, or actually two or more clauses. Okay, so we can have one or more clauses within a sentence. Okay, if we have a complex sentence, which means two or more clauses, these clauses can be related in two ways. We already started this topic several minutes ago, but this is now the segment where we're going to develop it a bit. Okay, so clauses in a complex sentence, two ways, related in two ways. Okay, we can talk about coordination and subordination. Perhaps you already know this from secondary school. Coordination, if you have two clauses, or three clauses, the clauses are syntactically equal. They can stand alone. They are independent. Okay, you can use linking elements like and, or but as coordinators. Okay, and or but as coordinators. So, for example, it was cold and the weather was rather bad. The first clause, it was cold. The second clause, the weather was rather bad. And we have the coordinator and. But you can simply omit the second part. You say it was cold, full stop. The weather was rather bad, full stop. Okay, so this is what it means. They are syntactically equal. They are independent. Okay. The second option is subordination, not coordination, but subordination. Okay. In this case, we have at least two or more clauses, but there is the main or superordinate clause, and there is the dependent or subordinate clause or clauses. Okay, so one of those is main superordinate, the other or the others are dependent or subordinate. Okay, so do you have an example? Perhaps we'll have a couple of examples later, but do you have an example of a clause of a complex sentence with subordination? Do you have an example of a complex sentence with subordination? You can use but, for example. No, sorry, you can use though, although, before, while, and so on. For example, it was raining while he was walking, for example. It was raining is the main superordinate. It can stand alone. It was raining, full stop. But while he was walking cannot really stand alone because of this while. Okay, it is dependent or subordinate. Okay, so think about examples. We have more examples of complex sentences later. Okay, think about subordinators. Okay, Now, we can go back to coordinations and coordinators. They can link words and phrases, units of the same kind, not only clauses. So coordinator and, for example, or can link words and phrases, not just clauses. But the rule is that the units you want to relate have to be of the same kind. Okay, so the units have to be of the same kind, like noun and a noun, adjective and an adjective, and so on. This is the rule, okay? Units of the same kind. And the units should have the same syntactic function, okay? So let me explain it, okay? So you have to use one unit plus one unit if you want to coordinate them, okay? So you cannot coordinate, for example, rain and wet. Why not? Why not rain and wet?
Doesn't make sense.
Doesn't make sense, exactly. So to explain it, rain is a noun, obviously. Rain is a noun, or possibly a verb, okay? Wet is what? Wet is an adjective, okay? So it does not make sense, as you said, it does not make sense to coordinate one noun and one adjective. So this is the rule, units of the same kind, okay? You can coordinate them, not just clauses, but words, units of the same kind. Or how about 8b? Also does not make sense. A desk and nice were brought in. You try to coordinate a desk, which is a noun phrase, and nice, which is an adjective. Does not make sense, okay? The explanation is you coordinated two units, but not of the same kind. And that's why this does not make sense. It is not grammatical, okay? However, so let me repeat it before I go on, okay? So you have units of the same kind, one unit plus one unit, and the same syntactic function, okay? Let's now see something about the so-called complex coordination, okay? So this was coordination. Now we have complex coordination. In this case, you can link two units plus two units. Remember, I mentioned one unit plus one unit. In this case, you can link two units plus two units, like in 9. Kate painted the kitchen blue and bathroom white. Okay, obviously the coordination is here. And so what did we coordinate? Perhaps you have the explanations in brackets, but perhaps you can give me the answer. What did we actually coordinate here? Kate painted the kitchen blue and bathroom white.
Two objects.
Two objects, yes, or perhaps direct object and an object complement plus another direct object and object complement. We are going to explain what is blue in this case. It is an object complement, white is an object complement, okay? Znači, dodatak objektu, okay, object complement. We are going to explain it today a bit later, okay? You probably already mentioned it in the grammar course, but if not, this is, the kitchen is the object, blue is the object complement. So this is, the kitchen is one unit, blue is the second unit, object complement, plus another object and another object complement. So this is what I mean by two units plus two units. We combine direct object and object complement with another direct object and object complement, okay? So think about it, white, an object complement, and blue, an object complement, something which is added to the object, okay? We'll have examples, we'll have something more about the object complement, perhaps in the second part of this today's lecture, okay? So think about it, to sum up, we have coordination, 1 plus 1, same units, but we can have also complex coordination, 2 units plus 2 units, okay? Now we have other types of clauses. You remember, let me go back, we have declarative, positive, negative, elliptic clauses, you already mentioned them. Now we have another division of clauses, other types of clauses. This is also important. Sometimes students have problems if they have to produce a certain type of clause during the exam. So think about it and ask if it is not clear. This is important. And in syntax, and you'll get this for the oral exam to provide examples, okay? So the first division is into nominal and modifying clauses. okay? Why do we call the first type nominal? Because they function as the noun, function as the subject or the object. You have it here in brackets. So again, we call them nominal because they have function of a noun, like a subject and an object, like in 10 A and B, okay? So whether we need it is a different matter, okay? Whether we need it is a subject, clearly, because it is followed by a verb, okay? But it is a clause, and it is a nominal clause because it functions as the subject. What can we, at the beginning, we mentioned the tests. What can we do to prove that this has the function of a noun? How about using a pronoun instead of the subject? It's actually quite easy. I'm not going even to ask you. It is a different matter. You can use it whether we need it. It is a different matter, okay? So you can use the substitution tests to prove that this is a unit and it is a clause. Why is it a clause? Because we have the verb, we have the predication, need, okay? So again, we have a clause as the subject, nominal clause. And now in B, we have clause as the object, okay? Why is it nominal? Because it follows the verb. It has the function of an object. It is a clause because we have a predication needed. And again, you can replace it with the what? I don't know that. I don't know that, for example. Substitution test, okay? So think about it. This is important, sometimes difficult for the students during the exam, the oral exam, to produce examples, okay? So this is nominal clause in the position of an object, okay? So these are nominal clauses. The second type is modifying clauses. They obviously modify something. They modify nouns or verbs and predicates. So we have two subtypes. You already know them, relative clauses. They modify nouns. And adverbial clauses, they modify verbs and predicates. Okay? Let's see the examples now. Okay? 11, A and B. First, this is a relative clause, which are on the table. This is also a relative clause in B, whom you see. But we can, so relative clauses, they modify nouns. Let me ask you now, all the books which are on the table, what is the head word? All the books which are on the table, what is the head word of this phrase?
Books.
Books, exactly. So just pay attention to this. This is a noun phrase altogether, okay? All the books which are on the table, it's a noun phrase because the head word is a noun. And this noun is post-modified by a relative clause. So this is a noun phrase, relative clause within a noun phrase, okay? And you have something in brackets here which we have to explain. Relative clauses, they modify nouns, but we can divide them into restrictive and non-restrictive, sometimes also called defining, non-defining. So what is the difference? You probably already did this in grammar course, or you already know the difference. You can see the clauses A and B. The first one restrictive, the second non-restrictive. What is the difference between these two relative clauses? They are both relative.
The first one is important for the understanding of the whole sentence. We need that information.
Yes.
And in the second one, we can omit it. It is not a problem. It's something additional.
Exactly. Just bear, this is important. Bear this in mind, okay? So we call it defining or restrictive because it actually, as you said, explains the noun books. Not any books, but books which are on the table, explaining the noun, okay? We cannot omit it. Actually, if you omit it, you do not get the same sentence. All the books belong to his brothers. It is not the same sentence, okay? So you cannot really omit this piece of information. You mentioned it, okay? The second one, just pay attention to commas. You have commas in front and after, okay? So this is a non-defining, which means you can omit it. This is an additional piece of information, okay? You can omit it. So this is relative clauses, modifying nouns, restrictive, non-restrictive, quite simply, okay? if you need any clarifications, you can always ask a question, okay? But think about the examples. You'll be asked to produce an example during the oral exam, okay? If you get this question, okay? And 12, I mentioned modifying clauses modify nouns or verbs on predicates. So this is an adverbial clause. Now we have to explain. They modify verbs or predicates. 12, Lynn read while Kevin was watching TV. Okay, was watching is a predicate. That's why this is a clause, while watching TV. This is a clause because it has predication. And it modifies reading, does not modify the noun, the subject. So this is an adverbial clause. They modify predicates or verbs. Perhaps you already know what type of adverbial clause this would be, while, with the subordinator while. Indicate temporal, exactly, indicating when, indicating time, temporal. Okay, think about it. While it's temporal. Yes, okay. So to sum up, we have modifying clauses, relative and adverbial, and we have nominal clauses. Okay, think about it. Then the next type of clauses I'm going to mention is appositive clauses. We have the same term in Serbian grammar, appositivne rečenice. Okay, they produce or provide new pieces of information about something already mentioned. So let's see 13, okay? His main argument that scientific laws have no exceptions was considered absurd, okay? This is a positive clause. Underlined structure is an appositive clause. Pay attention to the commas at the beginning or at the end, commas, okay? And this is something, okay, let me ask you about a comment. What do you think about this one? This is a new piece of information. We can omit it. His main argument was considered absurd, but we then don't know which argument, okay? So it can be omitted, but then we need clarification. This is what I have here, new information about already mentioned, something already mentioned. Now, the question for you, okay, may look at first sight like a relative clause, because that, you can also have relative clauses in English with that. But this is not a relative clause. How do you know, how can you prove that it is not a relative clause, okay? Can you, what would be the Serbian translation of this part of the sentence? Njegov glavni argument, and then what?
Da naučni zakoni nemaju, to jest, da naučni zakoni ne mogu biti izuzeti ili nešto na taj fazi.
Nemaju izuzetke.
Nemaju izuzetke.
Znači, to bi značilo zakon se odnosi na sve, je li tako?
Da.
This is exactly what I wanted to hear. Use da, okay? Think about it, da. Njegov glavni argument da. What is the translation of a relative clause like this, the first, like 11a? All the books which are on the table, koje su, okay? You have koji, koja in Serbian. So this clearly shows that this is not a relative clause. You have da in Serbian, that in English, okay? So think about it. Can be omitted, but then we need perhaps clarification of this now, okay? And it does not have the same subordinator like a relative clause because it is da in English, okay? It is da or that in English, okay? Okay, appositive clauses, and finally the last part of this file, finite, non-finite, verbless clauses. Neko od studenta je pitao u nekom mailu šta su finite, non-finite, čini mi se i verbless, pa evo sad smo stigli do toga, okay? Perhaps let me ask you, finite, let's leave verbless for the time being, okay? Finite and non-finite. It is, first of all, let me emphasize, it's not related to finished, not finished, okay? It's not related to finished, not finished. Perhaps you already know which clauses are finite clauses, which clauses are non-finite clauses. Okay, even in Serbian you can use finitne I nefinitne, ali možda ovaj drugi termin više govori lične I bezlične. Okay? finite and non-finite, not related, I have to repeat it, not related to finished, not finished. Okay, so finite clauses, they show tenses, persons, numbers, if it is possible to see persons and numbers, so they show tenses. Okay, for example, she saw them while they were running. She saw them, the first clause, saw. It's a finite clause. Why? Because you can see the tense. Okay. While they were running, also a finite clause, because you can see the tense, were running. Okay. With were running, you can even see the person. This is plural. They were running. Okay. So again, finite clauses, they show tenses. Sometimes they can show person and number, but not always in English. You can so the most important thing is tenses. You can see the tenses. Okay. Non-finite verbs, bezlične, they do not show tenses. Non-finite clauses consist of present participle, past participle to infinitive. We have a couple of examples here. Okay. So how about this one? C. He wants to know the title of that book. He wants is a finite clause. We have S, you see the tense. But to know the title of the book is a non-finite clause. How do you know that it is a clause? It has a verb. To know the title, to know, it is a clause. But this is which form of a verb? This is infinitive. You know that this is to infinitive. You do not see the tense. And that's why we call it non-finite clauses. So this is a non-finite clause. What is the function of this non-finite clause? It stands in which position for which function in a clause? Not obviously not the subject, but for which position in a clause?
Object.
Object, exactly. So this is the position of an object. So now let me add, this is a nominal clause. Ako ovo nije sasvim jasno, vi pitajte. So this is a nominal clause because it functions as an object. It's a non-finite because it does not show tense. You have to infinitive. Okay. D, waiting for the bus, she met an old friend. Met is a finite clause. She met an old friend. You can see the tense. But waiting for the bus, you do not see, you do not see tenses. Waiting is a present participle, ing, okay, does not show tense. So this is a non-finite clause, participial. And what is the function of this clause? Waiting, it's non-finite, but it's not nominal. It modifies what? What is the function of this clause, waiting for the bus?
Well, it explains the subject, so maybe. And therefore, I would suggest that it has maybe an adverbial function, no?
Adverbial, yes. This is an adverbial clause, perhaps modifying not only the subject, but you wanted probably to say the subject and the predicate together, predication, okay? Waiting for the bus, she met. She met while waiting for the bus. So this is adverbial, temporal, okay? And instead of, if you want to make it finite, you can say what? She met an old friend while she was waiting for the bus, okay? So if you want to make it finite, you can say while she was waiting for the bus, okay? But as it stands, it's non-finite, adverbial, okay? And the last one, C, the discussion completed, the chairman ended the meeting. This is non-finite. Okay, let me start from this one. Ended is finite. We can see the tenses, but the discussion completed is non-finite because completed is past participle. Completed is not a simple past. It's past participle. Why is it a past participle? Is it a normal sentence in English? The discussion completed, full stop. You need something which follows. Okay, completed after, completed something. Okay, so this is not a simple past. This is past participle, and it is a non-finite clause, does not show tense. It shows only, it has ed, but does not show tense. A past participle, like in work, worked, worked. That you remember the third column, the so-called complete, completed, completed. This is the third column. Okay, so this is non-finite. And if you want to make it finite, you can say what? When the discussion was completed, the chairman ended the meeting. Okay, so this is when the discussion was completed. Okay, I believe this is clear. Now we have just one more term to explain. Okay, so these are finite and non-finite. Finite, again, showing tenses. Non-finite, not showing tenses. Okay, verbless. 14a. When out of school, children ran home. Children ran home. Ran is finite, obviously. You have tenses. You have a tense, past tense. But when out of school is verbless. Verbless is self-explanatory. Verbless meaning without a verb. Does not have a verb at all. So when out of school, you don't have any verb. The verb is usually be. When they were out of school, children ran home. Okay, so verbless clause without any verb. Okay, and we can also add what type of clause is this when out of school. It's verbless, but also what? Is it nominal or adverbial?
Adverbial.
Adverbial, because it has when, temporal, adverbial, yes, okay? So think about it. This is the division of clauses. Could be a bit complex, okay? Let me go back. We have nominal and modify. We have finite, non-finite, verbless, okay? And you will be asked if you get this question for the oral exam to explain them and to give examples, okay? Now, let me ask you, because this is the end of this file, we can go to the second file of syntax. Do you have any questions about this part of syntax?
When you talk about divisions of clauses,
Yes.
they were positive and negative. Can you repeat that one, because the sound was breaking and I couldn't hear it.
Okay, all right. So positive clauses, they denote that something exists. The predication is that something exists. Negative clauses, predication denotes that something does not exist. Negative clauses have the particle not, or negative adverbial like never or nobody. Okay, so the predication says that something does not exist, is not true, and so on. Okay, is it clearer now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, all right. So we have the second part of syntax. Okay, let me perhaps wait for a couple of seconds if you have other questions, so we can proceed. We'll stop in about 10 or 15 minutes, then we'll stop for today, but we'll have to proceed with syntax and syntactic structures. Okay, so the next topic in syntax is syntactic structures. So we already mentioned it, I think, several times, that in language you have the hierarchy. Smaller units used to form larger units. You remember, phonemes used to make syllables and words. Words used to make phrases, clauses, sentences, and so on. This is what I mean by smaller units, larger units, like words and phrases to form clauses, words and phrases and clauses to form a complex sentence. We already mentioned it, okay? So we have different kinds of syntactic structures. So units, like words or phrases, they form structures. They form units in syntax, syntactic structures. We have two basic types of syntactic structures. The grammarians call it constituent structure and the dependency structure, okay? So you'll see that it's actually not anything especially difficult. Constituent structure, simply specifying which units are included in a given structure. Simply saying, okay, if you have the structure, that old car, you simply say constituent structure, okay, this is a noun phrase. You have the determiner, you have an adjective and a noun. You simply specify the constituents, okay? But if you want to discuss the dependency structure, obviously dependency structure showing which units depend on which units. So, for example, we can go back to the same example, that old car. If you want to use the dependency structure analysis, you will have to say, okay, car is the head word, and the determiner and adjective depends on this head word. This would be simply dependency structure, okay? So, dependency structure, actually, we have three basic kinds of dependency relations in English in any language. This could be modification. This is a relation between the head word and modifiers, like in noun phrases, all these books, head word. All these are modifiers, determiners. So this is the relation of modification. You have a head word and modifiers. Then the second relation of dependency is complementation related to verbs. Verbs have their complements. Complement in the sense of something added to the verb, dodatak, okay? So if you have a verb phrase, you have a verb and a direct object or subject complement. This is the relation of complementation, okay? For example, he read a book, verb read, and a book as the direct object. This is the relation of complementation. You something add to the verb, okay? If it is not clear, you can always ask a question, okay? So complementation related to verbs and the verb's complements, direct objects and subject complement. We're going to give an example with the subject complement a couple of minutes later, okay? And the third type of dependency relations is complementation. Sorry, we did that. Predication, this is the third type, C. This is the relation between the subject and the predicate. We already explained it. This is, you have it in a clause, subject and predicate, like somebody read. For example, they read a book. They and read, subject and the predicate, they form predication, the relation between the subject and the predicate, okay? Now, why this relation is discussed within dependency structure? What do you think? What is the, let me put it this way, which word is more important? They read a book, they read. The verb read or they? What is which word depends on which word? What do you think? For example, they read. What is the most important component?
Maybe read.
Read, the verb, the predicate, yes? So that's why we have this dependency structure. Somehow the verb is the most important part of the predicate, but we also have the subject which is related to the predicate. Yes, predication, relation between the subject and the predicate, okay? So we have dependency relations like modification, complementation, and predication, okay? Now something we already mentioned, so we can simply apply it in syntax as well. We mentioned endocentric and exocentric, you remember probably compounds in morphology, okay? But we can also use it in syntax for syntactic structures. So what about the first group, noun phrases, adjective phrases, adverbial phrases? The second group, prepositional phrases and clauses, okay? Now, let me remind you, exocentric meaning what? Meaning that the center is outside. You cannot reduce it to one element, okay? Endocentric, it is inside, you can reduce it to one component. What do you think about the noun phrases, adjective phrases, adverbial phrases, endo or exocentric?
Maybe endocentric.
Endo, exactly, endocentric. Why? Okay, I think I had an example of a noun phrase. Yes, all these books. This is a noun phrase. Head word is books. So if you omit all these, you still get the idea, books. So it is endo, inside. The same goes with adjective phrase, adverbial phrase. If you have, for example, very quickly, you can omit very and still get the idea of very quickly, okay? Prepositional phrases and clauses, they are exocentric. Okay, it's interesting to think about. So if you have an example, in the house, for example, this is a prepositional phrase, okay? What happens if you omit the preposition? You have the house. You do not get the meaning of the clause, of the phrase. If you omit the noun, in the house, if you omit the house, you still do not get the meaning. So prepositional phrases are exocentric because you cannot reduce this phrase to a single element. You cannot omit the preposition, you cannot omit the noun. And clauses are also exocentric because you have the subject and the predicate. You know that in English you cannot omit the subject. The subject has to be there. Okay, so we have the subject and the predicate together. Okay, so think about it. The first group endocentric, the second group exo, because you cannot reduce it to a single element. Okay. If you do not have any questions, we can simply proceed again with something which we mentioned already in morphology. Okay. So we have IC analysis for syntactic structures. Let me remind you, IC standing for immediate constituent analysis. Immediate constituent analysis. You remember we divided words into morphemes, but we can do this, the same thing in syntax. We can divide sentence as sentence into constituents. Okay, so in syntax, if you have a clause, you first divide subject and predicate, separate them first. So we have a sentence, for example, let's say use this tree, that girl opened the door. It's a clause and a sentence, S meaning sentence. You divide it first into noun phrase, which is the subject, and predicate phrase. P means predicate phrase. Then the noun phrase is subdivided into determiner and noun, that girl, and you finally write down the determiner and noun below. Okay. Predicate phrase subdivided into the verb phrase and noun phrase. Verb phrase consists of a verb, which is opened, and noun phrase consists of a determiner and a noun. Again, you can write down the verb here and the determiner and the noun at the end of this analysis. Okay, so we call these three diagrams Rachvasti diagram. Okay, so you can usually have lines between lines like these. Okay, anyway, the rule is subject and predicate separated first. Okay, now let's go back. Do you have any questions about it before we go to number 2? Okay, let me add. This is also something possible for the written exam. You get a sentence, you have to divide it into constituents. Okay, IC analysis in syntax. Okay, so let's see now the sentence 2. His sister visited her friends last week. You already mentioned we are going to divide it into subject and predicate first. His sister, the first part, visited her friends last week, the second part. Then you can choose. You can finish the division of the subject first or the predicate first. So subject subdivided into determiner and noun, like this. Okay. Predicate phrase subdivided into the verb phrase and the noun phrase, but also something else. What is last week in this predicate part? Visited her friends last week. What is the function of the phrase last week?
Adverbial.
Adverbial, denoting time. Adverbial, yes. Okay, so this is important. So in the predicate part, if you have an adverbial, you separate adverbial first. So we're going to separate it, visited her friends, one unit, and last week, the other unit, okay? Then you can finish last week by doing what? Last is a determiner and week is a noun. You can use it like this, okay? And then you have to finish the predicate, visited her friends, okay? What are we going to do with this? This is a verb and a noun phrase like this. Visited, verb, instead of opened, you can have visited here. And her friends, instead of the door, you have her friends, okay? So this is the same analysis like with 3, but with the addition of adverbial. So let me repeat this, okay? So you have the subject and then the predicate. Within the predicate, you first omit the adverbial, and then you analyze the rest, okay? This is what you usually get for the written exam, okay? Do you have any questions about this before we go to ambiguities? Okay, you'll have more examples with Natasha probably, actually certainly, when we finish this, okay? So this is the so-called IC analysis in syntax with 3 diagrams, okay? Now, this analysis can also solve some ambiguities, okay? So, for example, blue shirts and trousers. Why this could be ambiguous? We already have an explanation here, okay? Why this can be ambiguous? Blue shirts and trousers. Perhaps you can explain the ambiguity.
Because we don't know if blue refers to shirts or trousers. We're not certain if it's both.
Or both, exactly. This is what I had in mind, okay? So by using this analysis, IC analysis, and 3 diagrams, you can show that you have 2 cases actually. Blue, you separate blue first, okay? Blue shirts and trousers. You separate blue first, and then leave shirts and trousers. In that case, it means what? It means that blue is related to both shirts and trousers. But if you separate blue shirts first and then leave and trousers, in this case, blue relates only to shirts, not to trousers, okay? So this is how you can show, how you can disambiguate this structure. So blue separated first relates to both. Blue shirts separated first, blue relates only to shirts, not to trousers, okay? And that's all about IC analysis, okay? So perhaps it would be a good idea to stop here before we go to syntactic functions, okay? Do you have any questions about this? We can use these couple of minutes, 5 to 10 minutes for questions, if you have any questions, or somebody wants to ask something about earlier lectures as well, okay? Somebody asked me about the palatalization of English and so on. We can explain it now if you want. So do you have any questions about syntax and other topics?
Mail za konsultacije, kada možemo imati konsultacije?
Može konsultacije odmah posle, evo ako hoćete možemo ostati sada svi ili samo oni koji su zainteresovani, sve jedno. Znači možda da prvo pitam, do you have any questions about today's lecture? If not, then we can go to konsultacije, to the other topics as well. Znači staćemo kod naslova syntactic functions. Okay, first questions about syntax, which we did today. Okay, if not, then perhaps you can have questions about earlier lectures and something else you wanted to ask. Okay, so we have 5 to 10 minutes, so you can ask now if you want to. Okay.
Može pitanje jedno brzo samo oko kolokvijuma, jel kako god da bude situacija, vi gledate da uživo bude, je li tako?
Da, znači ovako, to je dobro pitanje, sve zavisi od situacije i uputstva fakulteta. Znači, kad pitamo nekog na fakultetu, oni nam obično kažu to u obliku snažno preporučuju, snažno ne preporučuju, znači ekonomni kažu da ne držimo kolokvijum, možda do kraja semestra, možda se neće ni držati, ali namera je da se kolokvijum drži uživo, jer jednostavno, ako vam budemo dali pitanja kod kuće, mislim da je jasno da možete sigurno prelistati neke fajlove, tako da vidjet ćemo. Znači, odgovor na naše pitanje je da, mi bismo voljeli da kolokvijum bude uživo u učionici, ali to na kraju krajeva zavisi od procene fakulteta. Ako ne bude, onda ćemo morati nekako da nadoknađujemo drugačije taj kolokvijum. Jer kolokvijum vam donosi bodove, znači ne možemo vam te bodove jednostavno oduzeti od ocene ili da im jednostavno dodamo te bodove, znači morate dobiti bodove za kolokvijum. Da, eto, toliko o tome, da.
Profesor, ja imam isto jedno tehničko pitanje. Meni za prošli čas, odnosno za prošlo predavanje i za ovo sada predavanje nije stigao mail sa linkom, a za
Dobro.
prvo predavanje mi je stiglo, pa ne znam da li možda treba da vam pošaljem ponovo svoju mail adresu ili...
Da, znači ja vidim, to je Nevena Matić, je li tako?
Tako je, da.
Da. Pa ja to mogu evo sebi da notiram, mogu da proverim da li je ta mail adresa u redu. Znači, mail adrese su sve unete tamo, vi ste znači jednom dobili, je li tako? Samo niste drugi put.
Dobila sam tako i u Google učionici sam od početka, sve je bilo u redu, samo je to...
Profesore,
Dobro.
mene takođe ne stižu vaši mailovi od početka.
Anja Mijatović, je li tako?
Jeste.
Meni takođe ne stižu.
Dobro, znači ovako, zapisat ću ja to, znači ovako, može da se desi, pošto vas ima 70 otprilike u grupi, da provider jednostavno nekima ne pošalje poziv. Znači, samo da proverim, da li vam nisu stigli pozivi za ovo predavanje ili vam nisu stigli mailovi za Google Classroom?
Meni za predavanja.
Za predavanje, je li tako? Dobro.
Meni su samo za predavanje, da.
To može da bude, znači to može da bude da provider, pošto vas je 70, da neke adrese, na neke ne pošalje poziv. Međutim, ja mislim da to možete da rešite ako međusobno, znači onaj ko dobije link, je li tako, ja mislim da može da pošalje drugom link, pretpostavljam, da tako možete da se konektujete, je li tako. Ali provjerit ću
poslali su nam kolege, da.
To može da bude rešenje. Znači, ja ću pogledati još jednom na spisak adresa, mislim da su sve adrese tamo, jedino provider možda nekog jednostavno propusti. Eto, to je odgovor na vaše pitanje. Da, ali proverit ću, da, dobro.
U redu, hvala vam.
Ništa, molim.
Hvala.
Ja sam pitala za palatalizaciju i Wernerov zakon.
Dobro, jeste. Tako je, sećam se, možemo, ako vam ne smeta, ne znam da li uskoro počinje književni kurs, ali ja lično mislim da imamo još par minuta da to objasnimo, ali tako. Znači, Grimmov i Wernerov zakon. Grimmov zakon, da samo kratko to kažem, znači Grimmov, to su pitalo je nekoliko studenta, Grimmov zakon se odnosi na razlike između germanskih i indoevropskih jezika. Sećate se onih primera koje smo imali, znači recimo latinski, engleski ili recimo grčki, engleski i tako dalje. Znači neke glasovne promene koje su se desile u germanskim, ne u ostalim indoevropskim jezicima, a ono što ste pitali Wernerov zakon, mi ne moramo tu ići u detalje, znači možemo, taj zakon kaže tačno koji glasovi se menjaju, nas to ne zanima, bit će samo dovoljno ako kažete. Znači, Wernerov zakon se fokusira na germanske jezike i pokazuje koje su se glasovne promene desile unutar germanskih jezika. To su oni primjeri koje smo naveli. Sećate se nemačko buh, englesko buk, znači h, k. Ili sećate se nemačko gut, englesko good, d, t. Znači, nije vam potrebno da tačno kažete koja vrsta glasova se menjala u koju vrstu, dovoljno je samo da kažete da se odnosi na promene unutar germanskih jezika i da se recimo to vidi kad se uporedi engleski i nemački. Znači, ne treba vam ništa drugo. Da li je to sad jasnije? Evo da pitam prvo.
Da, hvala.
Dobro.
Jeste, izvinite, profesor, možete opet da ponovite za Grimmov zakon?
Dobro. Znači, samo kratko, evo ovako, Grimmov zakon, on je odredio glasovne promene između, koje pokazuju razliku između germanskih jezika s jedne strane i ostalih indoevropskih jezika s druge strane. Znači, da budem jasan, i germanski jezici su indoevropski, to znate, to smo rekli na početku, ali neke glasovne promene u germanskim kojih nema u ostalim. Znači, sećate se smo imali recimo kentum ili hundred, kh. Sećate da smo imali brother ili smo imali frater, jel tako? Imali smo nekoliko primjera latinski, engleski, grčki, engleski i tako dalje. Znači, to je sve što se od vas očekuje o Grimmovom zakonu, ne morate tačno reći koje glasovi u koje. Mi smo dali nekoliko primjera. Znači, to je dovoljno što je bilo na slajdu. Sada čujem da li je sad ovo jasnije, pa ostalo još palatalizacija.
U redu, hvala.
Dobro. I još samo kratko, palatalizacija Old English. Okay. Palatalizacija je isto promjena koju imate, mislim da ste imali sigurno taj termin i u gramatici srpskog. Znači, uticaj i ili e vokala na konsonante kao što su k ili g. Sećate se primjera u staroengleskom za reč crkva, čiriče, tako piše se sa c i pa dalje. Znači, to piše se sa c, što bi se moglo izgovoriti i kao k, međutim izgovara se kao č zbog tog uticaja i. Znači či, ri, čep. A drugi deo se piše kao c, e na kraju. Znači opet c koje bi se moglo izgovoriti kao k, ali zbog uticaja e izgovara se kao č. Znači, kratko rečeno, palatalizacija uticaj e i i na konsonante kao što su k i g, na izgovor konsonanta kao što su k i g. K prelazi u č. Znači, to je ono što smo imali u engleskom. Znači, kao, sećate se, ship kao brod ili ship kao u engleskom savremenom sheep. Dobro, znači da, i onda oni primjeri koje smo tamo naveli. Samo da vas pitam, da li je sad to malo jasnije? Znači, glasovna promjena, uticaj i e.
Jeste.
Dobro. Ja mislim da ako ima pitanje, vi možete i dalje pitati. Ne znam da li će uskoro početi književni kurs, pa da čujem da li imate još neko pitanje ili da onda završimo za danas. Dobro, ako imam utisak da nema više pitanja, znači ja ovo onda prekidam i možemo da, onda vas pozdravljam, pa se vidimo